I'm not in any one specialist field. I'm not going to be the smartest person in the room or the most knowledgeable in that particular subject. So where's my value add? How do I turn their brilliance into something useful?
Hi, I'm Belden Menkus. Welcome to the Purposeful Strategist, the podcast that shifts the conversation about purpose and strategy from what organizations should do to what business leaders actually are doing and what they've learned along the way. The guest today is Dr. Pete Thompson, Chief Executive Officer of the National Physical Laboratory, or NPL. Since 1900, NPL has been one of the world's leading scientific research organizations, providing the measurement capability that underpins the UK's prosperity and quality of life. Before joining NPL, he spent nearly 2 decades at the heart of the UK defence science, including as Deputy Chief Executive of the Defence Science and Technology Laboratory. Pete, welcome to the Purposeful Strategist.
Hi, Belden. Delighted to be here. And thank you for having me.
Very glad to have you here. So if you don't mind, let's just start with some basics. So if on its website, NPL characterizes itself as the UK's National Metrology Institute. So what is metrology and what role does it play in society?
It's a great question. And I'll start with what it's not, because it's not meteorology, which sounds very similar and is spelt very similarly as well. So we're not about forecasting the weather or thinking about climate, although some of our work does relate to that. Metrology is the science of measurement. Whilst that might sound a little obscure, if you think in your own life about how many times you measure things in order to get things done, whether that's measuring the distance to put a couple of nails in a wall to put a shelf up, or measuring your own weight, or your latest sort of cycling feat on an app. The uncertainty in that measurement is what leads to, less accuracy, less efficiency. So that's the way to think about it. The science of measurement. It's all about the uncertainty in measurement. And whilst those are very simple examples, it's really important in terms of how the planet itself kind of operates effectively.
So I kind of get that. I mean, there is a piece of me that sort of thinks measuring things. Haven't we figured that all out? Is what is this? To me, science is all about trying to figure out things we don't know yet, and don't we know everything? I'm sure that's not the case. But where does NPL come into all of this? Can you give us a picture of what it's there to do, what its purpose is?
Yes, I will. I'll just throw in quantum technology just on this as a. You're right. We figured out how to measure lots of things and we understand the uncertainty. But when new phenomena, how we're using quantum technologies for quantum computing, for example, come along, then you have to figure out how we're going to measure that and how do we understand the uncertainty of the phenomena within quantum systems and technology. For the second part of your question, for the world itself to function effectively, we all have to agree on the different units of measurement, or else it would be absolute chaos. So ourselves and national metrology institutes in all of the economies across the globe work together to agree on these units. Fundamentally, that's the science that sits behind what we do. It's the application of that understanding is where we have real-world impact.
If you can, what's an example? I mean, you mentioned quantum, but what's an example, that I might understand, fairly straightforward language of some of the research you're doing and how that then gets applied?
Okay, so an example of the research we're doing is around timing. So in the modern world, with autonomous systems, with high-frequency algorithmic-led trading in the stock exchanges across the globe, then all of these trades happen immediately, and they're happening around the globe at the same time. Well, you need incredibly accurate timing and timestamps on every one of those trades to ensure that that system works effectively and can't be abused, if you like. So to do that, you need to have the ability to measure time at an incredible level of accuracy. And so a number of us around the globe work on the development of atomic clocks that then support international trading that delivers highly synchronized time signals into those systems.
A reality that sort of has just struck me now, but I suspect you and most of the people in your organization are aware of all the time and think about it, is the ability to not only measure, but as you said, agree on what the measurement is, sort of sits behind almost everything we do.
And we use the word uncertainty, which means something else in different spheres of life. But for us, uncertainty is about, we can all take measurements, but what's there? If we go back to school, we talk about error bars. What were the error bars in that measurement? Yeah. It's understanding the uncertainty in that measurement and then minimizing it, which is how we lock together all of these systems to work effectively.
So if you can, give us an overview of NPL today. How many employees does it have? Where does it have operations? Financially, how big is it? And where does the money come from?
Sure. Okay. So we are about 1,600 people plus 300 visiting researchers. We're the UK's National Metrology Institute. Our headquarters and most of our laboratories are in southwest London. We also have other facilities around the UK as well. And in terms of, we're a business that's owned by government. So I'm the CEO of a business, right, as well as having a responsibility to government. And so as a business, our revenue is around, it's just topped the 200 million per annum.
And when I think of revenue, I think of, so there's some sort of mutual exchange. We provide goods or services or whatever, and other people give us money. So who's the customer here?
A lot of our customers come from different parts of government who have a need that the NPL can help meet, usually in collaboration with other organisations as well. And we also work directly with organisations. In fact, everything that we do is on contract. There is no sort of fundamental underpinning grant or handout, if you like. We have to deliver outcomes on contracts.
If you had to describe NPL's strategy today, how would you describe it? What are you trying to achieve?
My tenure in this role, I'd say is characterized by a focus on impact. So the science at NPL has always needed to be excellent compared to the best science elsewhere because of the nature of the work that we do. And that's rarely been in doubt. Delivering impact from that science, making a difference for society, for people, for planet, for prosperity is what really motivates me. And there have been different iterations of the strategy based on what the most important priorities are for the next few years. But fundamentally, it will come back to, are we making a difference? And when you think that there's a significant proportion of public money flowing through, we may have won the contracts, but it's still public money. Then we have a duty to maximize the impact of that. So at the moment, we're focused on three things. One is we've been trusted to deliver some major national programs in both timing, as I mentioned, and telecommunications. So delivering the outcomes for society on those. Secondly, it's about helping to drive economic growth by helping companies scale. So the capabilities we have, the skills and the facilities mean that we can help companies, in particular in emerging technology areas, to confidence in the technologies that they're developing by the test and evaluation that we do with them. And that helps them get to market more quickly. And then thirdly, we're on a journey to be recognized in particular by industry as a national laboratory that covers both connects science, innovation and technology across all of the important sectors, certainly for the UK, industrial sectors and technology sectors.
And that strategy, I got the sense that sort of, as you mentioned, it evolves, the priorities change. But are those three strands sort of enduring strands that have been there for a while? And it's just a question of what are the national programs we're working on over the next few years? What new technologies do we need to be tuning into to help the companies that are trying to use that scale? Or is it, no, if you went back a few years back, there'd be four planks and there'd be different labels?
It's a great question. So year on year, the emphasis will change. Government priorities change. There's a particular focus in the UK on helping companies to scale. And hence why I'm focusing our attention on the difference we can make to help companies scale. But strip it back, and we're driven by everything that we do helping to generate prosperity and economic growth, as well as the national security aspects to what we do as well, which is becoming ever more important around the globe at the moment. I would always also mention the sort of the social impact of the work that we do. Environment, for example, understanding the impact of human interventions on the climate. If you go back to that point around measurement and having confidence in the measurements that you take, There's a lot of, I guess, political rhetoric around if organizations like ours can provide with the utmost certainty the underpinning confidence in the data that's been analyzed, then that leads to a richer, more informed debate, politics aside.
If I get part of the flavor of what you're saying there, one of the big things you bring is you allow the debate to move on from what are the facts to the much more interesting question of, so what do these facts mean? What is it telling? You know, we're not debating about whether it's 12 or 13. We've measured it. It's 12.75982. Okay, good. We're done with that.
Yes. Yeah, it's a great way of explaining it, because, you want the debate to be elevated above that, don't you?
Yeah.
And I've seen that so many times in life, in all different quarters, about the amount of energy that's spent actually arguing about a particular number, if you like, or figure. Whereas that's not where the value add is. The value add is in, we've got confidence in that now. Now, what does that tell us? What are we going to do as a result? And how will we know that we've made a difference?
So as the strategy kind of gets updated, as it changes, as it evolves, how do you go about that? Is it you in a room sitting by yourself? You know, is it a top team? Does your board, I assume you have some sort of board, do they get involved? How do you deal with stakeholders? You know, how does it actually come about?
If we take the latest iteration of the strategy as a typical example, if you like, 12 months ago, as I could see that we were likely to be asked to lead on some pretty disruptive activities, i.e. they were going to change the nature of NPL going forward, then I recognized that, that phrase, what got us here won't necessarily get us there.
Yeah.
So the successes that we've had wouldn't necessarily sustain us for the future, because we've gone through a period of rapid growth in terms of the impact we deliver, but also the diversity of the work that we do and many other things. And of course, there's this massively changing environment going on around us, affecting every fabric of organizations like ours. So some of the approaches you would recognize. So I got my team together and we used analytical methodologies, PESTLE analysis, SWOT analysis, a very inclusive exercise, and I brought in a number of our senior leaders that support the executive team. We undertook some training around agile mindsets and agile thinking to really open up the thinking and kept the thinking as divergent as possible. At the same time, I asked my chief people officer to lead with some external analysis about the way that we work and how we might be structured more effectively for the future, and they ran in parallel. All of that actually came together at the back end of last year, and I distilled it down into a need to be more customer centric, closer to the customer, and to improve the way that we make our decisions and the speed at which we're making decisions in order to enable us to deliver on those priorities. That then led to, in the early part of this year, I've restructured the business. So I've restructured the whole of the top team, the executive team. We're just going through the process of filling some of those vacancies at the moment, and it sits hand in hand with a change in the way that we're going to operate, understanding our accountabilities better. So, for example, in a perfectly reasonable approach to try and keep everybody informed on everything we're doing, a very inclusive approach across the organization, we had a proliferation of committees, and we lost sight a little bit of what that committee might be for. And so folks understandably believed that they had decision-making rights on these committees. And what happened is decisions just started to slow down because everybody had a view. Rather than you bring people together, but the person chairing it is the person accountable, they're making the decisions and you're there to help advise them. And you don't have to be there if you don't have any advice on that occasion. So starting to strip away some of the treacle, I like to call it treacle that had got into the system so that we can be more agile.
You know, just as a sort of comment on what you've said there, which well, two comments. One is you've pushed a whole lot of buttons that I tend to agree with, which is inclusive, sort of, you didn't use the word, but I'd call it exploratory. We're not trying to analytically figure out the answer. We've got to consider a whole bunch of different things and then kind of boil it down. But the other is the focus on accountability. I think for so many organizations, so many CEOs and organizations that I deal with, that we're in a world where accountability is almost lost. Yeah. It's very hard to go, yeah, good, got all that. But like, who made this decision? Who's going to make this decision? Because at the end of the day, people make decisions.
I start some of the meetings that I chair now with, it's very polite, but I'll say to the people in the room, we've got these decisions, or I've got these decisions to make today because I'm accountable for them, and I welcome your advice on them. And as I said a few minutes ago, if you don't need to be here for the entire meeting, that's fine. You can go, and don't feel like you've got to be here if you don't have a contribution to make, because I think that folks can drift into a little bit of presenteeism. They're a member of that committee, so they have to be there every 2 weeks or every month. No, you don't. It's okay. You've got other things to do. You go and do those.
We've all got too much to do anyway.
Yeah.
If you don't mind, I want to come back to what you were saying earlier about contracts.
Yes.
Because it does seem to me that, I suspect anyway, that as an organization, you've got lots of projects on.
Yes.
And it sounded like you do have some people who sort of come and join you for a time from somewhere else. But you've also got a bunch of people who, this is my day job. Well, I expect to get a paycheck every month. And so how do you manage that, sort of the ebbs and flows of the contracts you win and the contracts you don't, with the need to have a sort of stable, relatively stable, I assume, amount of revenue coming in?
So it certainly keeps my chief finance officer very, very busy. We, unlike other government-owned organisations, we don't have a fixed headcount or anything like that. We're a genuine business. So my job is to ensure that we've got the people and the facilities in place for the work that we need to do. And sometimes that is taking business risk in advance because we expect to win something and making sure that we've got the people there. And sometimes it's about taking a risk that we may have to have a very rapid mobilization because we can't carry people for too long if they don't have the contract work there. So it's a fine balance, and the contracts come with different profit margins as well. So typically with government, you're not generating a profit from the work. You're covering your costs with a little bit to keep the lights on. And when we're working with industry and other organisations, one thing that we can't do is what we call state aid. They must pay a commercial rate for the work that we do for them because they're getting a market benefit. And so we have to balance all of that in order to make sure that we can pay the staff and reinvest in the capabilities. So it is a fine juggling act. Sometimes we will have to turn down the opportunity of doing some really fundamental science just because it doesn't come in the right style of funding, that we can't afford to carry that. But at the same time, there may be an attractive piece of work with industry, but actually it doesn't fit what we're here for, the impact that we want to make. So we will decline that work as well.
So I'm going to use the word competitor, but you could equally think, what's the alternative? If a business comes to you and they want to get discuss something with you, if they don't go with you, what are their alternatives? Who's the competition?
We find ourselves in a position where we are in competition with a truly commercial entity. Then we're probably not doing the right work because we should be leaving the field open for the commercial organisations. As a national capability that has this traceability to the most fundamental measurements, then we should be doing the things that only we can do. We're here to help companies grow. So the last thing we should be doing is seeing them lose out on a contract because we think we can do the work better. But what we do is collaborate a lot with companies and universities in joint proposals. One of the reasons that we're often in that collaboration, the primary reason is that of the value that we bring. So you might have some brilliant researchers in a university, some really innovative companies with new technologies. We glue that together. The work that we do enables all of that good work to accelerate and move up the technology levels more quickly and give people confidence to get those things into society as quickly as possible.
One of the things I think I hear in that is part of your role is to be at the frontier. You haven't quite said this, but I could certainly see a dynamic playing out that to some extent, that whether somebody decides to do something with you, maybe in consortium with some other people, they're sort of making a decision about whether taking the next step at the frontier at this point with what we've got makes sense or not.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of describing it. We often use the word confidence. I've probably said it a couple of times in this interview. You give organizations confidence, typically in their data, the data that they're producing for their technology or their product or their service. We work with them. As a result of that, they've got greater confidence, or they might need to go back to the drawing board. But rather that then fail fast than later in the game. We've seen companies go to, supply chain companies go to the big primes and say they've been squeezed by the prime. I've seen real world examples where the supply companies have gone to them and said, well, we've had this checked out by NPL, that we've worked with them. They're telling us, and the primes have gone, yeah, okay, fine. Let's move on.
Well, I can imagine that there's often a lot of that issue of helping people who are trying to do something new and different know they can trust their own data and then be able to explain to other people, because at the frontier, there's often a lot of confusion. And what I hear you're sort of saying is, well, but we kind of help take some of that, maybe not all of that, but a lot of that out of the equation.
There is a lot of confusion and a lot of claims made. It could be genuine, could be less genuine. But if you're in an emerging or frontier technology area, somebody somewhere needs to have the confidence to know what to measure, what's important, what properties of this new tech are important when it comes to the regulatory environment that they might have to pass. What will the regulators be looking to measure? And actually, we work in between the two. We help the companies think about how they're going to navigate regulation. And I think increasingly we can help the many, many regulators out there understand what technologies are coming down the path to them and how their safety cases, what they measure now, doesn't really apply to these new technologies.
You mentioned security before. You came into NPL from a sort of defense and security background.
I did, yes.
For you, did that feel like a big shift in direction, or did it just feel like a logical next step?
In terms of moving sectors from defense and national security into an innovation sector and driving technology to make a difference on the economy and all those sorts of things, it's probably why I've been driven by focusing on impact in my time in NPL, because if you're working on science and technology and national security, you can often see the impact quite quickly of the work that you do, especially during the period of time that I was working in that sector. And so I had, before I joined that sector, and I certainly had when I left, just an obsession with seeing work that's done making a difference. And so I brought that to this fabulous organization with brilliant science, but it wasn't necessarily as connected to the end users as it could be.
Well, so in the time you've been there, how's it changed?
I suppose I'm going to sound a little bit like I'm congratulating myself, but the way that it's changed is for the positive. I mean, we've navigated some pretty difficult periods of time, but for the lab, which is building on the excellent science, the way that I've changed with many colleagues, I've changed the organization is to be far more externally focused. So it's not about doing great science and then seeing who wants to apply it. It's about understanding what society and industry and the planet needs and then shaping the science to meet those needs. I focus on customers and people. Do we understand who our customers are and what they need? And are we doing our best to look after our people? And the financial figures, to an extent, look after themselves. The revenue growth is because of the focus on customers. Some of the brilliant innovations that we've got is because we've done our best to create the environment for really smart people to excel.
You know, Pete, one other thing, just hearing you kind of talk about that, I'm hearing you navigate what I think is one of the real, internal challenges for CEOs and leaders, which is, you have to recognize you have agency. Some of this stuff that happens, it happens because I was here, I did something. But equally, you have to recognize, and it sounds like you absolutely do, that yes, but there's hundreds, if not thousands, of other people involved in making this happen, and their contributions also had to be there. That on the one hand, you can end up with this sort of, I showed up and presided over something that was going to happen anyway, so why are we paying you? Right. And on the other hand, it's like, it's all about me. I am the genius and I hear you sort of in a very good, healthy, balanced way, kind of navigating through that.
Yeah, and I think early on in my career, realizing that if you work in a science environment, then knowledge and intellect is a real currency, in particular in academia, but also in other science organizations. And I think I was probably fairly smart early on to think, I'm not in any one specialist field, I'm not going to be the smartest person in the room or the most knowledgeable in that particular subject. So where's my value add? How do I turn their brilliance into something useful? And it felt like a niche skill to start with until I realized that it was making a real difference, connecting somebody with a need with somebody with the brain power to solve it, interpreting the language of both parties and having credibility with both parties.
Yeah.
Knowing enough with a really smart scientist to ask the intelligent questions, but probably spending more time with the person with the need, with the customer, with the end user to really get to understand what their actual problem or opportunity was.
And what's your aspiration for NPL over, let's say, the next 10 years?
To some extent, we are only limited by the scale of our own ambition. Of course, we have to be funded for the work that we do, but I think if we stay central to that external focus and continue to look after our people, then the growth and impact will continue. In the near term, really delivering the really important outcomes of some major national initiatives. Our reputation depends on it. So I can talk a good game, but if we're not delivering outcomes, then it becomes pretty irrelevant. I love industry in all of those most important sectors in the emerging tech to be talking about NPL consistently as the go-to national lab that's helping them grow, generate tax revenues into the exchequer so that people will have their pensions paid for in the future, so that all the public services that everybody wants in the future, they get it because we've got a growing economy. So I'd love for the lab to be recognised in a broader way. We do it in some of the sectors, some of the time, and we're very successful at it. I'd like to see us scale that to make an even bigger difference.
You've mentioned a few times some of these big national programs. If you can, maybe you could just describe one so I can get a sense and listeners can get a sense of what sorts of things are we talking about here.
So I'll do my level best not to dive into the exciting details of it, but we're one of the largest groups of scientists and engineers working in quantum technologies in the UK. Now, I don't want that to be the case in the future because I like to think that there'll be lots of companies with more of those skills because that's a success. Like most nations, that we've got a national endeavour to realise the benefits of quantum technologies, both for prosperity and national security. And we are critical to that, whether it's quantum computing, quantum communications, with some of the skills that we've got. So really delivering an impact for society in that area. We've got a major program in timing that I mentioned earlier, which is to ensure that the UK's got a resilient timing infrastructure that supports so many different sectors. We've just launched a Centre for AI Measurement, and the measurement is the key word on the end of that because we've gone this long, Belden, without mentioning AI. So I apologise. We might have made it to the end, but
I knew it was coming somewhere. It always is.
So this is about technical assurance. So there will be companies out there that are assuring other companies in the way that they're using AI. So how do you get confidence in the assuring company itself? That it goes back to that traceability and underpinning, having stable reference frameworks that the assuring companies can test with an organization like NPL.
One other thing, and we've sort of touched on it, but science sort of has some kind of immediate application and immediate national needs, but then it's also something that's got long time horizons. I suspect some of the fundamental research just takes a while. So how do you, particularly as the CEO, how do you try and help the organization properly balance up short-term and long-term?
You've reminded me of a phrase I used a few years ago. In fact, it was in my defense days when a minister visited. And I didn't invent the phrase, but I certainly used it in that situation where I presented to the minister something that we'd just done by applying science to a particular situation. And the minister had come to see the good outcomes from what we'd done. And I said to the minister, this is a great example of a minister of a 10-year overnight success.
Yeah.
Not my phrase. I can't remember where I got it from, but to land that message that this didn't happen by accident. This happened because funding was put into people and expertise and knowledge over a sustained period of time, which meant we were able to do that. It's sort of tip of the iceberg type activity that made a difference. So it's another one of those fine balancing acts. A good number of people join NPL because they want to do that long-term knowledge generating research, but actually once they're here, they kind of get the bug for the impact side. We mustn't take our eye off that, because if we just focus on the near term, you empty the cupboard of all the knowledge and the skills that you need in the future. So it's just fine. And I've got a chief scientist who I task, if you like, to keep a focus on that, to make sure that we've got the right balance within the portfolio of work.
Yeah. Pete, this has been, for me, I hope it's come across to you, really fascinating conversation. There's so much in here I wish we could dig into. Particularly, I at times I can get kind of nerdy about. Tell me a bit more about that thing about the quantum. But I don't think unfortunately, I don't think we've got time for that. Just wondered if there's anything else you'd like to share with our audience, either about, NPL and its role, or about yourself, or about leadership, or about anything.
Well, I've enjoyed it as well, Belden, so thank you. I think if I just talking about myself as a leader and sort of reflect on one of the comments I made earlier, which is I recognised early that there was a role, there was a benefit I could deliver in working with some of the best scientists. And I've come to think of it as, the 5%. And the reason I say that is a mentor of mine a good few years ago, he said, so these people you're working with, Richard and Andrew and a couple of others, they are world leading in their field. Yes. He said, so think of those as verticals. In their field, they are absolute experts. And he said to me, he said, what you do, Peter, is you add 5% to that vertical for Richard and for Andrew and for Tony and for the others. And that 5% is the connection between the fantastic scientific brain and work that they're doing and how it translates into something that somebody needs, a customer, an end user, because that's where you work. And your 5% is on top of each of these verticals. And then he said something really smart, I thought. He said, no, just turn that diagram you've got in your head of these. He said, just turn it 90 degrees now, and your 5% stack on top of each other, and that's your vertical. That's your expertise. He said, believe me, they recognise that in of itself is something that they can't do. I think that's driven me as a leader and gave me confidence.
One thing I love about that is it's a real world example of the value of diversity. In a practical, like, you bring a skill set that they may be fantastic at what they do, but actually having you there just makes it even better. And I don't hear you saying, well, if I really wanted to, I could do what they do. It's like, there's tons of things I can't do very well. It's like, great, I better go do the thing I'm good at. And it sounds like you've in some ways, you've done something that I think makes a huge difference to most people. You've figured out something you're good at.
Thank you. There's probably something else in that 5%, which is creating the environment so that person can be the best version of themselves and produce the best possible outcomes, whether that's a technical specialist or these days, whether it's a director working for me or whatever it is. That's sort of, it's a common thread, I think.
Yeah. Well, and I suspect I may have a stereotypical view, and it may be wrong, but that some of those, kind of world leading, et cetera, the environment that makes them work best isn't necessarily the same as the environment that makes other people work best. That you really have to think about the individual, which is what I hear you saying. You think about customers, you think about people.
Yeah. I agree.
Yeah. Good. Pete, again, thank you so much for joining us. I'm really, really excited about what you're doing there. Really love to hear about it. We'll look forward to hearing how NPL and you kind of move on from here.
Super. Thank you. It's been a pleasure, Belden. Lovely to meet you.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of The Purposeful Strategist. In addition to being available on our website, you can also find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. If you enjoyed this episode, please do follow us and leave a 5-star review. It helps others find the podcast. Thanks again, and join us soon for the next episode of The Purposeful Strategist.